said, we will have some questions at the end. This is a very much back to basics presentation and training, but at the end, you'll get a chance to have the PDF, which we're going to send to Joe to circulate to you. There's my Twitter handle at the end if you want to get in touch. Always happy to continue the conversation in other places. Also, if you have any questions, if you have a story that you want to get out there, you don't really know how, by all means, at the end, not only will we be taking questions on what we've been presenting, but also if you want any advice on how to sharpen your story up, we're happy to give that at the end as well. So, without further ado, um, why work with the media? I don't know if you know who Rosalynn Carter is. She is the um, President Jimmy Carter's late wife. She was a very massive champion of mental health long before many others, especially around journalism. And she started a fellowship, at which have some information at the end of the presentation. But her take is that informed journalists can have a significant impact on public understanding of mental health issues as they shape debate and trends with the words and pictures they convey. Very words to remember as we go through and why we're doing this, that the media is actually just one of the channels that's important to use when trying to influence policy decisions, but also to influence the narrative and the discourse around perceptions and attitudes to mental health issues. So what you need to know about the news. So what is news, actually? We think we all know what news is, but when you are writing news, you have to take a few things into consideration. So first off, news, it's timely. So it does what it says in the word itself. It's got to be new. So it's got to be relevant. It's got to be right then and there. You're not going to be writing about something that happened a month ago unless there's been a new development in that. We also look at what kind of impact it has. So when you're looking at an editorial menu or a budget of what you're going to be covering that day, the bigger stories that have the biggest impact in terms of it could be the greatest number of people affected. It could be large amounts of money happening. It could be just something, really large scale. They tend to rise to the top of the news agendas. Proximity. Now, this especially is true of local news. Global news is a bit different, but with local news, you definitely are going to be prioritizing the stories that are happening in your neighborhood, in your province, in your state, in your country, in your region, and then going out globally. Prominence. So the people that are the subjects of the news, do they have a lot of status? We're gonna probably people have a bit more interest in, say, what happens to King Charles than they do to the butcher at the end of your street. So not that the butcher at the end of your street is any less important, but people have less interest. They don't really know about him, but everyone knows about King Charles. So he'll rise, especially if you're the Daily Mail newspaper, rise in importance for on the news agenda. How relevant is it to your audience? So when you're thinking about news, really, news is nothing without readers or viewers or your audience. If you have a trade publication that's for mental health professionals, they're going to have a different kind of standard of story than you would if you're pitching to a general news audience who has less familiarity with the issues, a different vocabulary. So you have to think about how relevant your story is to the audience of the outlet that you're pitching to. Novelty. So there's a phrase called tail wags dog. So a news story isn't like a dog wagging its tail is not news, but if the tail wags the dog, then it is news. And what does that mean? It's just something that's unlikely, something that might be a little bit bizarre, something that might be a bit odd, that is unexpected, will also have high news value. and sadly, conflict. As we know, we've all seen in the headlines that have been absolutely focused on what's happening in Ukraine and Gaza. Sadly, not as much in Sudan or Ethiopia, but conflict tends to lead the news as well. Stories also, they just have a lot of tension. To make a good story, you need some tension. So conflict makes a sort of kind of perfect subject for stories. Again, if you have any questions on, how to interpret any of this, we will have some time at the end. So I'm just going to skip through. Of news takes different formats. So we have news. These tend to be factual reports on events, updates to ongoing stories. This is just your kind of standard news story that you might think about when you think about, say, on the World Service, you have news bulletins. I'm sure in your local radio stations or television stations, you have just the quick little news stories. These are news reports. You have your feature stories. These are the human interest stories. They involve more storytelling, lots of color. This is where all of the case studies that you've been collecting come into play around feature stories. They really just, bring put the human face on issues. A news feature, it combines the factual reports. So there might be, say, a new statistic that's come out on, if we're just looking at a standard newspaper, on the front page. And then on page 2 or 3, you might have a news feature that dives into, say, that statistic, that brings in that human element that goes a little bit deeper than just the news story would. You have an explainer. These have become very popular. They make complex stories accessible by explaining background. They do exactly what they say on the tin. They explain the background, the significance or technical meaning of a news story. So, for instance, when Donald Trump was in court last month, there were a lot of explainers on the process and what the legal terms meant, because it allows the media companies to actually explain some of these technical, say, jargon or processes that not everyone has access to understanding. These play also really well on social media. So I don't know if you've seen, and the BBC has a man called Ross Atkins. He's really taken this to a new level, and he's kind of raised the standards on these video explainers. And if you haven't, I would say definitely look for him on Twitter, because he really is a sort of masterclass in the explainer as a format. They play really well on social. They really tend to do very good with the video format as well. And then you got your opinions. So this is, you might have heard the terms op-ed, which is opinion editorial, or a leader, which is when an editorial board of like, say, the New York Times, they take a position on something, and they write an opinion, their editorial on it. It could be a piece of analysis from an expert or commentator, but it is very much, I guess, more in line with thought leadership than the news. And it coming from somebody with a deep expertise, a subject matter expertise, makes it a lot more credible. So some of you might be trying to get op-eds placed in your local papers, or more regional or national papers. You would want somebody from your organization that has a bit of credibility and authority, like your CEO or director. Interviews can either take the question and answer format, or they can be more narratively written by the interviewer. Also, the interviews are what you would get when you get put up to do a television spot for reactive news. You're going to have somebody from your organization sat there answering questions, very lightly edited, maybe cut down to fit their time, if it's a pre-recorded one or if it's live, to fit within a certain time frame. Photo essays. These are a series of photos on a theme or an event with long captions that do the storytelling. These can be really, actually, really great ways of humanizing stories. And you would normally commission a photographer to go take lots of pictures through your organization. You would help them meet the people that they would be doing the subjects on. And there's a lot of perhaps not covered in this presentation, but happy to talk about this later, a lot of ethical issues that you need to keep in mind when you are commissioning photos, as I'm sure you're all well aware of. And then data visualization. So again, this is something that has become more prominent over the past 10 years, especially in a digital age. But it just takes pure data sets and information and turns them into graphics, charts, illustrations, infographics. Sometimes they're animated. Again, the animated ones, the infographics, they can work really well on social media and on websites. And then you've got your OSINT, which again is also very kind of new to the news world and, kind of really gaining in prominence over the past 10 years. And OSINT stands for Open Source Intelligence. And these are the reports you see from satellite imagery or using publicly available data and information. Bellingcat is probably the best known media organization that has used that. Also forensic architecture. If you're interested in social justice issues, I would say have a look at forensic architecture, who do a lot with open source intelligence and social justice issues. Those are news formats. So how do you get noticed by journalists? So those, I just wanted to spend that time to go over, some of the formats, just so you're aware of all the different ways to think about how you can position your stories and what a journalist is thinking of how they're going to treat the story. Is it going to be a visual story? Are we going to use a graphic? Is it going to be a feature? So I just wanted to keep that fresh in your mind. But really also, I think probably one of the most important things is actually how do you communicate with journalists and how do you get noticed by them? So communicating like a journalist really helps. And this is kind of really digging deep into journalism speak. So if you talk to an editor, they'll just be asking you, what's your top line? What's your angle? What's your peg? So I thought it'd be really good to just have talk you through what all of this means. So one by one, the top line is really, what is the story? Tell me in one sentence, and that is your top line. You've got to be able to really boil down what the story is in one line. If you want to you can think about it like your headline and stand first. That's your top line. And also, you should be answering most of the 5 Ws in that top line. Also, something that my own personal test as an editor is the so what test. So if you have your top line and somebody says, well, so what? If you can't actually provide them with a rationale within the top line, it hasn't really passed the so what test. Also, some people confuse stories with issues. So while you work with mental health issues, journalists work with stories. So a topic, like the prevalence of depression, that's just an issue. A story is that like say men have overtaken women in the prevalence of having um, more men are suffer from depression than women for the first time in 10 years or something. I made that up, but that's the story. Um, so what's your angle? And that's the perspective from which the story is told. Different ways to look at angles, but you were going to look at that depression story. You're going to pitch it a different way to a business reporter than you will to a health reporter. They have different beats and they need different ways of telling the story. And you can take, it's quite interesting if you take one story that you want to pitch to a journalist and try to find different angles to pitch to different types of journalists. Um, Try it from a business angle, try it from a consumer angle, try it from an economics angle, and well, that's basically what angle means. And you really need to understand why that story is important to them and their audience. Um, and once you keep their audience in mind, you'll understand what a journalist is working towards. And then the peg. So what is a peg? It's exactly like like a peg that you would hang your coat from. It is what you are sticking your story to while you're telling the story now. Is there new data available? Has someone said something interesting that's new? Or has somebody important responded to an unfolding event or an allegation? Do you have a valuable insight or comment to contribute to an ongoing story? Um, is there an event happening, like an anniversary of something, or a World Day, or Blue Monday? I think was one of these days that have been made up, one of these made up days, but now get press coverage. So, is there a date coming up that you can actually go, oh, okay, we know that people are going to be talking about this topic at this point in the year on this date. How can we contribute to the conversation? That's your peg. Um, and then I've created this checklist for you, really around when you are going to be approaching a journalist. Are you actually prepared to meet their needs? And somebody who can come armed with all this information in the right format and do the work for the journalist will probably get a much better response than somebody who's unprepared. So what is that? Well, you have two different types of, of news. Think about it, your own stories that you're being proactive. So these are planned news, or if something's happening in the wider world and you're reacting to it, you have reactive news and reactive content. So when you're being proactive, when it's planned stories, you might have a press release because it's an event or a piece of information or a new report that your organization's launched that you want to get out into the world. In that press release, you're going to have your top line, your facts, your quotes, and you want that sent to all the news desks and news wires, and also your big contacts list of correspondents that you're working with. Again, there'll be different journalists on the list depending on what angle you're taking on your story. Do you have a briefing to give them context, or maybe even a policy briefing that you can share with journalists that will include CTAs, things you want to see happen as an advocacy group? These CTAs really provide really important context for a journalist who doesn't have the amount of expertise you do and is looking to advocates and champions to help inform their coverage of the issues. Fact sheets are always super helpful to journalists. Data and evidence, especially if you come from an organization that's considered, credible and authoritative, and especially if you have data that you haven't, that only you have access to, or that your policy people have crunched themselves, original data and evidence, that's incredibly valuable. Um, Data that comes from big UN organizations is considered, World Bank, UN agencies, really, those are considered, kind of gold standard, that gets used by, that's where journalists go to fact check data. So including any sources you have in your fact sheet is really important, so the journalists know where you got your data and it's not just made up. Case studies, really important, really bring the story to life when you can put that human face, or you can show the impact of treatment or show the impact of certain mental health issues on people's lives, or the impact that your organization has made. And that's also very helpful. Journalists always need to speak to people that are part of the story. So if you can have, obviously vetted and, bringing people who've given their consent to speak to the media, you might even want to think about, do they need extra media training? What kind of support might they need around any kind of, if they are willing to speak to the media, they might need some support around the interviews. You have to think about what the impact that might have, on them as well. Do you have films and photos that work across all the channels? And when I say all the channels, I mean you've got your media channels, which are, TV, online video, basically, um, social media, website, and email. So if you have films, is there a YouTube? Do you have a YouTube, your own YouTube channel? If you don't, I highly recommend it because it makes it very easy to sort of embed into emails and into websites, and into news stories or blogs. People can easily just take, a YouTube link and embed them right in there. That is uh, very helpful for the journalist who needs a media-rich, especially if they're working in digital, who needs media-rich storytelling, but also for you, because then you get the backlink to your YouTube video. Reports, even longer format, reports, especially with executive summaries, are really valuable to journalists who are, covering mental health issues, in the long term, for them to get up to speed on the issues. But also when you're launching, a report, you think about how you're angling that and what kind of news value it might have. Collective statements and letters. So this is like with multiple signatories from experts or well-known figures. If there are experts and well-known figures writing a collective open letter, these do get attention, in the press, depending on what the issue is. Do you have spokespeople and subject matter experts who are media trained and briefed? If not, I would, look into, starting uh, uh, a course, and putting some sessions on for internal spokespeople. So when the moment comes, they're ready to go. Also, letting the journalists know that you have these spokespeople who are available, really helps. And, also, maybe you've, organized an event like a protest, or having a petition being delivered, or some sort of publicity stunt. You're going to want to press release that, and make it as visual as you can, because it's really, really good, even if it's just a photo, on page 2, or a photo in a carousel online or on Instagram. Um, the interesting photos, they do get covered. So that's proactive news. This is all the stuff that you planned, you've prepped, all the things you need in place, that you can go to a journalist and say, hey, this is happening. Hey, we have this report. Hey, we have this. It makes it just their job a lot easier. Then you have the reactive news. So this is exactly what it says. It's when you're reacting to things that are happening in the external world. So, they take the form of interviews with press. So, I mean, that is just the basic, um, you know, let's say some big celebrities had, I don't know, some, uh, big public mental health issue, that's got coverage, and, TV stations, entertainment columnists want to talk to, mental health organization or experts around, that issue. That would be, you would be kind of there helping them, having your spokespeople who've already been media trained, briefing your spokespeople in and offering them to the press, or you might be responding to press requests for that. You can also issue a statement related to whatever the external event from. This can come from your own organization, just generally, or it's leadership like your chief exec or director. Letter to the editor, let's say you've seen something published in a newspaper of record, or you've heard something on the radio, you can write into the editor to add to that story coming from your organization. That does then become searchable online as well if people are Googling that. So that can be a way to be a part of the story after the fact. And then really, like I said, if you're doing any kind of reactive work, having a list of people who are trained and briefed for media interviews is really essential, because you've done the work and they're ready whenever the news happens. So again, we'll be sharing this checklist so you can go through and see what you have and what you don't, and you can start considering what you might need to put in place to get your organization's media ready. So it's not just when news happens, or it's not just when you want to get covered, or if when you get responses from media. Something that's really important is actually becoming a trusted source and just building those relationships with journalists all along the way. So, if you have a relationship with a journalist and you're in touch with them, so you see them at networking events, or you're an email contact with them, or if you have regular events yourself that you put on, you're inviting them, that is really, really important. They'll be more likely to come to you to get reaction, or they'll be more likely to cover your story when you have one, because you've become, you've taken time to build that relationship. They know that you're trustworthy and credible. So, I mean, I just listed some ways you can do this, hold background and policy briefings, preferably in the morning, preferably with free pastries and coffee, so they can swing by before work, get a bit of background on something or on policy when you're ready to do that. And that's a great way also just to start building those relationships with those journalists. Once you know them and you've had a bit of FaceTime with them, or you've been in contact with them on Twitter and you've started an email, if there's other stories and developments, not just about your organization, but about the issue, share it with them. It shows that you're not just trying to, be kind of, pushing your own agenda, but just you're really sharing, knowledge sharing with them. If they've written something or produced a video that you liked, let them know. It's really, we don't always get feedback. In fact, we hardly ever get feedback as journalists. So you just constantly turning stuff out. You don't know how it lands. If there's something that you've seen, let them know. They'll love you for that. It's really great to get feedback on your work. So don't be shy. Um, and if they've written something that you've liked, or they've produced a video or an infographic, or even just a tweet or an Instagram post or a TikTok, share that. Go and repost their work on social, tag them on social media. But don't overdo it, because then it looks like it looks a bit insincere. But if you really like their stuff, share it. They will love you for it. And then on your own, be active on social media through your organization, or get your leadership to be active, or you yourself, if you're the ones who are going to be going to the media yourselves, be active on social media, add value with your content to the areas that you're experts. Also look for other ways that you can, we talk about the media, we think of these just sort of traditional news organizations like New York Times or CNN or whatever, but there's lots of podcasts out there. And if you can get your leadership on one, that would be great, because we're always listening. Journalists are always listening to podcasts, are always looking to reading and consuming other types of content to stay abreast of all sorts of situations. And if they're researching something on mental health, they're going to look for credible mental health podcasts to listen to get up to speed on the issues. Or is there an organizational email, and even if it's not your organization's email, another organization's email, if they do like weekly updates around the issues, that you can, share your own organization's contact with them. So you are just slowly raising your profile. So if a journalist is part of a bigger organization email database, they will eventually see your content. Just start thinking of small different ways you can raise your profile. And I have some news in action. I'm going to skip through this just to make sure we have enough time for Patty and your questions, because I'm sure you're wanting to hear from the journalist itself. But I just thought what we just wanted to see what that might look like. So this is a really strong line with new information. This is what a top line looks like. Mental Health Uganda, an organization dedicated to mental health illness, has revealed through its hotlines that more women are contemplating suicide as compared to men. So this is new information that MHU has itself compiled, and it is unique and original data. Really strong top line with new information. A different angle to mental health is linking it with sports betting. And what is that link? So this is a novel take on mental health from a different angle. So you can see all the different layers of what I've just gone through kind of in action in this headline. This is a compelling case study. There's a link to a video, but we don't have time to watch it, but we'll share the links with you later. But just so you can see that France 24 is in Kenya, and there's a woman that is talking about her own mental health issues and struggles and how she's found treatment and whatnot, which really brought the story to life. Actually, it is a story rather than just a topic. So this is a national angle on a global story. So they used World Mental Health Day, International Day, but they looked at cases in India. So this is showing that value, that news value around proximity and relevance. So taking something global and localizing it. So I'm sure wherever you are located, there might be some global issues happening that you can find local angles for. So this is a big sports star who has been put off the football team, because of his mental health issues. And again, this was covered by Reuters, which is an international news wire. And I'm assuming that everyone knows what a news wire is, but if you don't, please speak up and we'll answer some questions at the end. But this will provides a good opportunity to be reactive if you see this happening. It's like, oh, hey, wait, we have experience working with, sports people with mental health issues. We actually have some data on this, or we have an opinion on this story that we can offer up to the media that might be covering it. So this was a fun because it talks about internet slang, but a kind of different take on looking at how social media has come up with a new slang for talking about mental health, and just really humanizing the story about how people have taken their own mental health issues public on social media and found a new language for them, actually, that then through social media have gained prevalence. So more of a kind of a culture story mixed with a mental health story. And then an opinion. This is an opinion piece from an expert. He talks about actually data that came out in 2022 from WHO, but why that, and then localizing it to his region, and why healthcare services there need to prioritize mental health. And then some further reading before we go to Patty. I wanted to just flag two pieces of content you might be interested in. Tanmoy Goswami is a journalist who served a fellowship 2022-2023 at the Reuters Institute, which is a journalism institute in Oxford. And he really looked at how media is covering global mental health and its economics. And he's written a really interesting report on there, which we can share in the chat after I stop sharing my screen. I believe Caroline has a link she can share with you. But I think really, I thought it would be very valuable for you to have a link and read through in your own time, so you can start looking at how you might want to work with the media to help start reframing how they cover mental health issues in your region. And then also wanted to make you aware of the Rosalind Carter you saw. I used a quote from her at the beginning. They're at the Carter Center in the US. They actually have a fellowship for mental health journalism, and people from all over the world get fellowships. And this is really interesting because on this webpage, again, Caroline can share a link with you in the chat. There's a link to a database of all the journalists who've gone through there and all of their work that you can search on. And I thought, you might want to really just dig into that database and see what's come out of that. Might be really valuable for you to see the leaps and bounds that journalism has taken through the fellowship. And if you know any journalists who might be interested in it, showing them this opportunity might be also an interesting way for you to help build capacity in your media by encouraging people to apply for this fellowship. And that's it for me. That was a whistle-stop tour of news and how to talk to a journalist. I realized I went through a lot of things very quickly. You'll now get a chance to talk to or hear from Paddy McGuire, who works at the BBC World Service. He also has experience working on the ground. He can tell you a little bit about, and then we'll have time for questions after. Paddy.
Hi, good morning or good afternoon or good evening, everybody. Thanks, Roxanne. Loads of really interesting, useful information in there. And hopefully what I say will dovetail with what you've said so that it knits together in the minds of the people who are involved in today's meeting. So yeah, I work for the BBC World Service, which is the BBC's international radio station. I haven't worked in TV. I'm a radio person. That just seems to be the format that I like. And I was just checking our figures. Every week on the World Service itself, we have 318 million people listening around the world. So that's a significant audience. It could be a farmer in a field in Uganda, or it could be a CEO sitting in, in their office in Mumbai. So a very wide, diverse range of audience, and therefore a very wide, diverse range of stories to appeal to that audience. So what I would say from the outset, and I've got 10 minutes, so I'm going to try also to keep it short and sweet, is we are always under pressure. We're always busy. We're always on deadline, and there's always airtime to fill. Now, that's not to say, oh, we're so important. It's because resources are stretched. You've got one person doing the job of two people, and there's a constant demand for things to be fresh because of the nature of how the news landscape works these days. So what that means is we're always looking for new stories, and there's always a market for good stories. So take heart in that. It means there's always room for a good story to get on air. That said, there are cycles of topics that come round again and again. Elections, for example, and there's also something called news fatigue, where both the audience and sometimes journalists may have heard too much about a certain story and it drops off the agenda. We are aware of that. So it's always good to remind us of something that may have dropped off the agenda. It's not because there is somebody saying what should or shouldn't be at the top of what we're doing, but it's because people forget we're human and we don't always have the time and resources to keep up with every angle of everything, though we try our best. So if something is new or different or strange or surprising, that will always find a way onto the air. And so I work for a global outfit, and within the newsroom, there is the world service, there's domestic news, there's radio news, there's TV news, there's online news, all of these different parts of the zoo, they all need feeding in their own different ways. So as Roxanne was saying, there's a story that may appeal to a London journalist for the BBC, it may appeal to be part of domestic news or national news, or it could be an international story. I think the point is we all talk to each other and look at each other's material. So if something is strong, it will get picked up by other people within the BBC and then treated in its own way by that particular part of the news zoo. So as Roxanne was saying, if you've got these different people who can speak in different ways about different parts of the story, there could be room for them, whether it's on a national, international, or local level. And I think that principle would apply also to what you're doing in terms of your local, national, or even international broadcasters in country. So there's a 24-hour news cycle. That means there are bulletins, there are different programs, all of which need people to provide stories. And every team on those programs or those desks will be handing over from one team to the next with ideas and prospects. So it might be that a story comes in overnight but needs verification, and it can only be picked up by the day team, who then will have the resources, hopefully, to be able to chase it up, chase it down, and turn it into a story that makes it on air. We have experts, of course. We have regional experts, South Asia, Africa, Asia Pacific, Middle East. Find out who they are. You can pitch directly to them if you create a contact or connection with them. You will be able to say, hey, look, I've got this story about mental health in wherever it happens to be. Here's my angle, as Roxanne was mentioning. Here's the top line. Here's what I can offer you. If you've done that work for them and there's a personal connection in as much as it's not spam or a round robin, then if the story's good, it'll happen. Obviously, there's also climate, there's health, there's science. So there are experts within the BBC on all of those angles, and you can find them through their byline. You could try emailing them. There are planning teams, there are health teams. You could find them on Twitter. There are loads of ways to find a way in to contact the journalist. But again, obviously, you want to do it in a professional and straightforward way. That's it. Professional and straightforward. We all in life respect that, and we respect that in terms of our work as well. In terms of sourcing, I think Roxanne mentioned if we got a new report from the United Nations, we would trust that as a reliable source. If a report came into our inbox or was picked up by within Britain or internationally, what we consider to be reputable mainstream media, we would also use that as a source. If we were going to hear from a smaller, less well-known outfit, we'd probably want another source on that to verify it as a story or to corroborate it as a story. So it's all about making sure that what we hear or what we're being told, we can, with good conscience, say, okay, we've looked into that in enough detail to know that it is as true as we can establish from our office in London or using our correspondent who's on the ground in whichever country you're in, and so on. So that verification is vital. There is a lot of distrust of mainstream media these days. That's the landscape that we're working in. But we still work with integrity. We need those sources, and we need to know that our sources are reliable, whether that's a person or an organization or whatever it happens to be. So that being said, we would use anything from a 30-second clip of somebody to a full-length interview with somebody to working with one of you guys, with a local journalist, so that they could do an on-the-ground report or package. It could be TV, it could be radio. All of those things are possible. And so just because, for example, I work on the bulletins desk, the kind of, let's say, accident and emergency of the newsroom, you never know what's going to happen and you have to respond to that. Other people have more time to treat a story with more consideration in a longer format. So what might make it to a bulletin story, another person will pick up and say, hey, let's make a documentary about this. And then they'll need to be working with you on the ground and getting more in-depth access and so on. So from the smallest germ of a story or from your report, something really big could happen. And it's really good to be open to that idea, as of course you will be, because you want to get it out there. Yes, I would say, in short, within our bit of journalism, we all feed off each other. So if you get something in there and it's picked up, it's likely it'll get more traction elsewhere. So that's really, really encouraging and good to know. How am I doing? I'll move on. Use of language. Okay.
About another minute. 1 minute.
Okay. Oh, really? Have I? My goodness. 1 minute. Okay. So we cater to an international audience. So many of our listeners don't have English as a first language. We need to be clear, concise, and accessible. So we avoid, in inverted commas, clever language. We just need to be clear and precise. So if we have to think too much, or things aren't clear, or there's a contradiction, we won't trust that source. And I think it's important to point out advocacy language and goals can be very different from journalism language and goals. So obviously I'll use terms that I think everybody knows, but in fact they won't. You may have a key message which may or may not be what the journalist wants to follow. So a journalist generally won't be told how to tell a story. If they see a story that's to be told, they'll pick up what it is that you've put their way. So just make sure it's clear, straightforward, and then you have to trust them to do a good job with what it is that you've provided them with. So a press release or a report, we would never use that press release verbatim. We'd certainly not copy it, but we'd use it as a basis to produce our own story and our own house style, using the facts and the angles that you've provided with in a way that works for our audience. So keep your initial introduction short and sweet. Make sure everything's correct, because everything that we do works on trust. How am I doing, Roxanne?
Right, that's perfect time, Paddy. So I just want to get a sense if you have questions that you want answered. Please do. I don't know, Caroline, Joe, the best way to do this, if we should pick up questions in the chat, or if people will raise their hands. So one thing I would say, though, listening to Paddy, I just wanted to, before we go into the questions, I just, three sort of little nuggets, and that is, the media works on a local, national, regional, and global level. You can have really good relationships with your local and regional, national, and when it comes to global, international media, there will be correspondents either based in your region or your country. So getting to know them and including them is really important to get your story more widely told. Also, if you don't have a list of journalists that you're working with, start building one, and include their email. See if you can get their email and their Twitter handles, and Instagram or LinkedIn handles as well. And then finally, my last bit of advice is persistence pays. Honestly, you're not going to get your first story. You might not get your first story, covered, but just keep going, build those relationships, and it will pay off in the end. Okay, I've seen some questions. How can we implement this issue in our country, in Ethiopia? So I know Ethiopia has a unique media landscape with a lot of, I would imagine, government censorship. So I think they have to be very careful in how you craft your stories. So I mean, you would know best on what's allowed and what isn't. And also, I would say, as you probably know, sometimes it's better to have those behind closed doors relationships than it does with public relationships. But I would imagine you're probably working more in a public service type of information rather than trying to I don't know, expose any wrongdoing or anything like that. But if there is a more specific question we can help you with, I don't know how to say Mika, please do type a follow-up question to that if that hasn't answered your question. I think that the next one for you, Patty, is there a format to follow for writing an op-ed for the BBC Online? And are there specific times which would work best?
Okay. No, there's yeah. Okay, I'll pick up on that one. Is there a format to follow for writing an op-ed? Well, an op-ed piece would probably be written by somebody who's got an established relationship, either in-house for the BBC, although we generally avoid op-ed pieces, although there are room for them. It depends which part of online you're looking at. So that's a tricky one to ask for. That would probably be an in-house person who writes an op-ed piece. There are other there's other media outlets within Great Britain, for example, who might do that or would do that. But again, more likely to be an in-house person who does that. Online pieces themselves, again, mostly written by BBC journalists, but it could be that you, as the expert in your area, form part of that piece and would be so and so from XYZ said XYZ. And so you form the backbone of the piece, but then it's written with wider context by the BBC journalists themselves. I hope that sort of explains that. Yeah.
Great. And Joe, thank you very much for your follow-up comment. Salvador asks, is there a specific recommended format or structure that an email reaching out to journalists must follow? No, I wouldn't say there's a very strict structure in terms of a template. I would say keep it very brief, though. Also, what you don't want to do is write an article with on spec and say, hey, can you use this? Very much, I would say it's not a template so much as what to include. And I would include very much from the start that you have this story, what the top line is, if there's a peg, we talked about peg, so is it why now? Why should this story be told now? And so it should answer that. And also what materials you might have. So you might actually have a press release, you might have a report, or you might have a background policy briefing that just you can attach or link to within there. Or if you have somebody that's available for interview, just include all that information. But really, I would say, if you can wrap that up in like 3 paragraphs, that's probably all that information, very briefly written, is probably the most important when you're pitching. Also, if you can show some understanding of their audience and why that story is important to their audience, that will go a really long way as well. Patty, if you have anything to add.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, no, I'd say absolutely right. Know the output. So know who you're talking to. Like all of us, anything that's too generic or isn't, we can all see that. Journalists can see it, it when you read it in emails that come to you. So just make sure it's targeted. And short and sweet. Yes, Roxanne, when you say paragraphs, I don't know if you mean actual full paragraphs, but I would say 3 sentences, 4 sentences. Keep it really tight.
Well, that's for you, Patty, and you're working in like quick news. But if you're writing if you're writing features or something, you can go a little bit longer. It depends who the journalist is.
I guess so, and it depends on sort of what you're trying to establish at what point. If you just want to quick in and to take it further, yeah. So there's no hard and fast rules, but yes, for people with limited attention spans.
Another question: how safe is contacting a journalist on Twitter for a victim who is likely being prevented from reaching out after being discriminated by a large body? I would say contacting journalists on Twitter or email is great. Sometimes you can reach them on, well, Twitter's changed a little bit now. You can't just have message anyone the way you might have been able to before. But definitely I would not reveal any information about that person in any DM on Twitter, a tweet, or in an email. I would just say you know of somebody and then get them on the phone. Obviously you want to protect anybody who's been a victim or survived something, who is in a vulnerable position, and you don't want there in any way any kind of data breach happening. But yes, contacting somebody on behalf of someone else, absolutely. If you don't reveal anything, I think in that communication until you can get a direct line on the telephone, it's probably the best bet. And Joe's asking, Patty, do you get many emails from large press release distributing tools, and do you ever read them?
Okay. We get emails in our inbox that are obviously from organizations, but in terms of distributing tools, I honestly don't know. I don't know how they come to us, but we do read. I can only speak for myself, really. I certainly read or will scan a top line of a press release. If it jumps out at me there, I might read further. So it really is. It's pretty brutal, you know. It's just like you reading a newspaper or looking at you know, when you're scrolling on Twitter, you'll go, yes, I'm in for a bit more, or no, I'm not. So our human reactions are the same across the board. So consider that. But yes, we do read them, and a press release could easily form the start of a story. But like I said before, it wouldn't be the only thing we use within a story. It might cause us to follow up with whoever has released it, or to look around it and see what else is going on. It's a good starting point for sure. Yeah.
So I think, thank you, Patty. We have to wrap up, but I also would just say there are things like if news wires, I don't know if everyone knows what those are, really important. If you are an organization who writes press releases, or you want to start looking at how you can email your press release to your regional newswire, because what they do is they compile all the news. Also, there are like news diary services that compile all these feature dates that editors look at to plan their features. So in the UK, there's something we call FENS. I don't know what the regional equivalents are, but if you can get your event into those news diary planning services, again, it's probably just an email you send your release to, and they get put on the agenda. It will be that will show when your journalists are actually planning their news. And yes, thank you, Caroline. We will wrap up now. Sorry if there are any questions we didn't, if you had any, but please do. I will share the PDF, and Caroline will share that out to you. And feel free to contact me on Twitter or elsewhere. Thank you so much for taking this hour with us on Tuesday, I'm sure in your busy times. Thank you, Joe, for having us, and thank you, Patty, for joining, and Caroline for moderating.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you both very, very much. This has been such a great session and really got my my juices flowing. It's always really great to kind of be thinking about what makes that story and what can grab attention. So thank you very much. For anybody who's interested in this session, we have recorded it and we will be posting it online to watch again. And if you do have any questions or you want to put anything past me, I'm going to drop my email address into the chat, which I have just now. So if there's any stories that you're thinking about pitching and you're thinking about how to do it, I'm happy to support you, happy to have a quick chat at any time. And as Roxanne said, she's on LinkedIn too and Twitter, so do reach out. But thank you all so much again, and really look forward to seeing you guys. So with the next one of these sessions, we also have a communications working group call tomorrow as well, where we'll be looking at how you develop case studies, which can be useful for fundraising, for media, for lots of different things. So please do check that out if you are interested in that too. All right, thank you so much, and see you all very soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.